Hello everyone, we are live again with Bootcamp 2020. We are still continuing with our AWS services because there are a lot many. So today we are going to cover the multiple stack and Route 53. Sajja, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I just wanted to add that we are not going to cover all the services that are covered in the repository. We are going to cover some of them, and we will decide in relation to the importance we think are more important. And some of them are not even in the stack in the repository yet. For example, VPC, Virtual Private Network, and we'll add that as we go forward. Therefore, it is from class to class. We are adjusting the syllabus as well. And after this, the main topic after CDK, the main topic that is left is React Native, which we are not going to cover extensively, but we are going to cover enough so that you can also build mobile Android and iPhone apps. But we'll see about it later. Huma, why don't you cover multi-stack? How do you do? How do you develop multi-stack applications?
Okay, sir. Multi-stack application. Let me share my screen because there's not much for me to tell. Let me show you the code. Okay. So, multi-stack application. Okay. Up until now, what we have done is mostly we have created an app, and within one stack we have put up all the resources we need. But Sir Zeeshan has mentioned it earlier and couple of times that this is not how we are going to work in real life application. We won't be putting every resource in one stack. Why? First, because this is not considered a best practice to put all your resources in one stack. It won't be easy to debug or change. Secondly, uh, you won't be having just one application. You might have one for production and one for development, so again you might have multiple stacks. So it's not very difficult, it's very easy. So let's cover the example that is in repo right now. The example in the repo have one app with two stacks. This is how it is. We have front end stack as well as back end stack both in one app. This usually what we do is only have one, and the file we don't visit very often is this step. Since now we have two stack in our main lib folder, we also have two stack mentioned here on my our bin folder. So this is my new front end. Both of them, front end and back end, are coming from my lib folder. Front end, the scope of this is this app which I have initialized here. Const app is equal to new CDK app, the name of both of the stack. The code is quite very super easy, simple, and that is front end actually has a website. For that we have CloudFront and website deployment. We will get our website URL from this. And second stack, backend stack, is very simple. Again, we have a backend lambda and an API for that lambda to access that lambda. Now, when I'll deploy it, it will prompt me. Let me show you CDK deploy. It will actually prompt me that what I actually need to deploy, because now I have multiple stack in my app. Waiting for the response. It will ask me that what actually, yeah. Since this app includes more than one stack, specify which stack I have to deploy. Either I can add a flag of dash dash all and it will deploy both of them, or I can mention the name of my stack, in my case front end or back end, and it will deploy only one. Now in this example, I actually need to deploy backend first so that I can have the API for my lambda and place it in my front end. But it depends on how you need to deploy your stack. The other example which I have here is slightly different. This is the example I have. This is my application, and I have two stacks here, one for my development and one for my production. Okay, I have initialized an app, and this is my lib folder. Okay, the slight change what I have done is here I have deployed my stack based on of some conditions, and I have provided props. Okay, if we don't provide any prop, environment is considered default. Whatever I have provided in my configuration will be my account and my region, but if I provide it explicitly, it will pick up from here. Now example, development stack is having account, my account, and region US East 1. Production is having different, because in production I want my app to be closer to my users, so I have deployed it on used East 2. Maybe it's more costly as compared to East 1, and I do not want my development stack to be more costly, so that I can change these environments so that I can use it to my benefit. The other property attribute I have provided is development, dev, and boolean. In development it's true, but in production it's false. Let's see how it affects my stack. This is my production stack. This production stack is having prop, and out of that prop it will extract the value of dev. Now I have initiated a resource, and the type of resource depends upon the value of dev. This is ternary operator. If the dev is true, I want to deploy the instance which is actually cheaper and smaller, because that's suitable for my production. But if it's false, I want to deploy something which is larger, which can cater my audience, and costly as well. The same is done with my second step. Again, I'm seeing the prop, dev. If it's true, do this or do that, and then that instance is used in my EC2 instance. So having multiple stack actually helps you to modular your code, to manage it better, and you can use it in different ways too. Sir Zeeshan, do you have anything to add? You can add now.
Okay, so Huma has covered it quite in detail, but the only thing you need to understand is basically whenever we are working on an application, we have discussed in our last class as well, that whenever we have a quite big application, when we are working with the multiple resources, we will not be using the one stack and adding everything inside that. Either we will be creating a specific construct, and that particular construct can handle a specified other specified task. Let's say, as I mentioned in the last class, that we will create a construct which handles all the lambdas, and then another uh, construct which will handle AppSync related details. There is another option which Huma has mentioned today, that we can create a separate stack for our backend application and front end application. So if we wanted to deploy something, our website, so we will use a separate stack. So whenever we wanted to change anything into our web stack, our client side stack, it does not affect our backend stack. So backend stack deployment does not gets to involve into the deployment or changes of the front end. And similarly, if we wanted to change anything into the backend stack, front end should not be get affected by that. So what we can do is we can create a separate stacks for these, and these stack can talk to each other by.
I think we lost Zeeshan.
Yes, we do. Let's wait for him.
Humayun, meanwhile, Zeeshan joins us. Let's cover some things. Nowadays, you are working on graph databases. Can you tell something? Working on the small project on it. Can you tell something? What are graph databases and so on?
Graph databases are not so new. It's been around like more than 7 years. Graph database are around, and people are seeing more and more benefits out of using that graph database. And then every field, AI, IoT, and all are seeing benefits of graph database. One thing which people might think that if they are so useful, why skip Why shouldn't we keep using the older version? Okay, sorry, it's back.
We are going to cover it extensively in the next class. Not in the next exactly in the next class, but
Coming
after a few after the few weeks. Yeah, Zeeshan, sorry, continue.
Okay, so I was just mentioning, so that we'll need to create separate stacks so that we can manage, and these stacks can talk to each other by sending an ARN or by sending in a variables to as an into the instance or props, so we can manage them in this way, in such a particular way. So moving on with the route 53. So what is route 53?
Zeeshan, sorry,
Basically,
before
first
we
we need
start
to
with Route
understand.
3, you mentioned that you can send ARN numbers between
Can
stacks.
you hear me?
Did you say that,
Yes, he said that.
Zeeshan? I think you are again stuck.
I believe there is a delay.
You're saying something, sir?
I was saying that you said that between stacks you can communicate between stacks by sending ARN numbers. How?
Basically, you can expose the variable of your stack, make it a public variable, and then you can pass it to the another uh,
Uh,
stack. So you can assign the properties.
okay, okay. You can start with the next topic.
Okay. So the next topic is Route 53. To understand what is Route 53, first what we need to understand that basically whenever we are working on the web, basically, or what we call, we send a request to a particular website, we say facebook.com, or like we are talking at this moment on the streamyard.com or any other website. Whenever we type a domain name which is facebook.com, streamyard, gmail, hotmail, or any other website, this is not actually what internet understands. This domain name is nothing. Your actual application, the machine at which your actual application resides, does not know what the domain name is. Basically, on the internet, every machine or every system you wanted to access has a number which is called IP address. So the complete internet is based on numerical values, just like you have mostly you have seen 192.168 or something like that, 255 dot something. So there are these type of IP addresses. So every machine which is hosted or which can work as a server or which can respond to a particular request has an IP address. So if you have to remember the IP address, imagine you need to remember the IP address for Facebook and for the Gmail. So it will be two IP address would be enough for you to forget every time, just like we forget our passwords. So that's why what the community of internet or the community of web did is basically whenever you type a domain name, which let's say facebook.com, it is basically sent to a server which is called a name server. First it goes to the root DNS server, which is called a service name, domain name service, domain name system. They receive a request and they find out which name server is working for them, and then from that name server it returns an a, another name server. Let me show you, it will be quite easier with the uh, example. Okay, so in our repository, you can find this link over here, Route 53 record and routing policies. In this article, this is good article. This article is very good, and you need to read it in a full so that you get the idea what the actually how the web works and how these A record and C names and all these things you need to understand it. So as you can see, initially when we type something example.com, a DNS resolver, this is mostly your IP server, internet service provider, your ISPs. Your ISP send this request to a root DNS server which contains all the server names, and it returns you it is called a TLD, top level domain service. So if it's a facebook.com, it's in a piiac.org, or it's an xyz.pk, So all those domain names has a separate name servers. So when you request the example.com, it returns a top level server name where all the .com websites are registered. So it returns to the DNS server, and then your DNS server send that request to your name server, which is TLD server. That domain name server returns the name server of your actual service. So for example, if I buy a domain from the AWS, or if I buy a DNS service from the GoDaddy or anything, so that particular service, so your example.com will return, in our case, it will return the Route 53 of AWS. Then you will send that request to, it's done automatically. It's being held inside behind the scene. So your request again go to the Route 53, and then that domain name server, your Route 53 will return you an IP address, which is actual IP address of a machine or a system or a virtual network, which your application has deployed. Once your DNS resolver receive that IP address, then your DNS resolve your browser send request to that particular IP address to extract to fetch the website. Then you receive the website. So this is the basically how you internet resolves your domain name, which we generally don't know what is happening behind the scene, but there is a lot is going on behind the scene. So there is a DNS, domain name services, or domain name systems, which holds all the detail about what are the domain name servers are, because there is a difference between domain name and IP addresses. Those domain name servers has the list of multiple name servers. From those multiple name servers, you get actually the actual DNS service, which can be, there can be multiple. We have AWS, we have GoDaddy, and we have many others. You get the name server for that particular service, and then that particular service return the IP address, and then you get this IP address, and then this IP address returns actual website. In our case, what we'll do is we'll deploy our website on AWS CloudFront. So AWS CloudFront is a service of AWS, and we'll map it to the AWS route service. We'll stay behind the AWS route service. So it will go, in our case, it will go to the AWS route service. Now, another thing you need to understand, there is a difference between domain, and there is a difference between domain and hosting. Domain is a domain name. Like I wanted to buy a domain, I'll go to the GoDaddy, I'll go to the cheapdomain.com, and I'll find a domain. So let's say uh, myapp.com. I try to buy myapp.com. That's only a domain name. You cannot host your application. So you might have to host your application. So if we forget about AWS, what we do is, let's say I'll deploy my website on Firebase. I'll deploy my website on Hariko. Then Hariko will give me a long URL, app.abcxyz.harikoapp.com. That's a name which you will not like to give to your customers or your users. You like to give your user a facebook.com or a, like example.com. In our case, in case of a StreamYard, we have a StreamYard.com. In case of Medium, we have a medium.com. But this is not actually the URL on your actual machine. So if I'll deploy on the Hariko will give me a longer URL. If I'll deploy on AWS CloudFront will give me an URL which is not ideal to be given to the users, and user cannot remember that as well. Now what I have to do is, the service I have buy the domain from the GoDaddy, let's say. I have to map these two. For that, what I'll do is, in the GoDaddy, I'll pick the URL which is provided by the CloudFront or the Hariko. I'll put that URL in the domain services of GoDaddy, and I'll also put this name, my ABC, my app.com, into the Hariko as well. So that's how the mapping is done. And once you will hit the URL example.com, this whole process will initiate it. It will go to the DNS, and it will go to the name server. It will go to then GoDaddy's name server, and GoDaddy's name server will return you the actual IP address. That's how the process goes on. So what Hariko did is Hariko actually created its own domain name services. So for that, let me just show you. So Hariko has given us, sorry, AWS has given us a domain name Route 53 on which we can manage our domains, our DNS services. We can manage our traffic, like we want to do routing, so DNS mapping, we wanted to manage our DNS mapping. Third, we wanted to check the health of our application, if our application is in working condition or not. So checking and health of application is itself a task. You have to ping every time your website. So these three services are provided by the Route 53. First one, domain registration. So if you want to buy a domain, you can buy the domain from AWS service directly. Let's say if I'll go over here and I say I wanted to buy Zeeshan.com. Check. It will show me that Zeeshan.com is not available, but alzeeshan.com is available, or anything else, or you can change the name again and then you can verify. Now what I can do is I can go and click on add to cart, but it will charge me $12 at this moment. So I am not going to buy this for the test example. So we'll use the free domain services, but you can buy the domains from the AWS as well. Like you can buy from the GoDaddy, you can buy from the cheap domain, and there are many other services. So first service is you can buy the domain. So your AWS will work as a registrar of your domain. So whenever you, so GoDaddy is a registrar of a domain, cheat domain is a registrar of a domain. So we need to, the whole concept of DNS mapping is to combine the registrar and the DNS service. So first one service is this. Now, if you have a domain, your own domain, and you wanted to map your domain, you wanted to use AWS DNS service instead of your domain's DNS service. So what you can do is we have hosted zones. You can create a zone. Like I have created a 3-1. Let me first show you the uh, a website which is named freenom.com. You can create your account over there, and what you can do over here is you can find few free websites. So to test our application, it will be quite great for us to understand. So let me just sign in. It keeps sign out every few minutes, so you have to signing in again and again. Okay, so what this service does is it has its own name servers, and it gives us the facility to buy a domain. So if you wanted to, let's say, demo app AWS, so it will show me few name. It's taking time loading. So it says demo app 1.tk is available, .ml is available. So for our learning purpose, we do not have to worry about. So what we can do is get it now. It says 0 checkout, and you can actually have a domain. I read the agreement. We generally take it directly. Okay, so once we complete the order, it will be in our list of domains, and we can manage its DNS. Now my domains, go to my domains. I was testing, so I have created multiple domains. So as you can see, domain demo AWS 1TK, we have created this domain, and we can manage DNS from here. So now we have this domain. What we can do is in our hosted zone, we will create a create hosted zone, and here we'll specify our URL. You guys hear me clearly, right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll specify this domain over here in my hosted zone. Give it a description. Okay, now what you can do is you can use AWS Route 53 to create hosted zone, basically a DNS service for your public app or your private cloud. So as Sazia initially mentioned that we can will learn in future VPC, virtual private cloud. So we can create a virtual private cloud inside the AWS. So we can create the hosted zones so that we can create DNS and URL and everything for our private cloud as well. So at this moment we are not going, so we'll going to the public hosted zone and I'll create the zone. What it will do is it will show us a two record. One is record name. It says simple authorization. It's something. It is a name and there is a name server. This is important for us. So it gives us a 4 name server so that it can manage the routings, or name server manage all the routing. So we have the name servers of AWS in the way we have created the. Now what we have to do to manage to connect both of these services, what we have to do is we have to specify these name service inside our manage DSN of our domain. So I'll go to there, I'll go to the management tool, use custom name server, and it will give us. Now, from here, what you need to understand is if you specify the name server, that means you are saying to this domain management service that I don't want to use your name server, I'll be using some other name server. If you wanted to keep use this name server, so you do not change that name server, but you will update the DNS record from here. So I'll show you what DNS record are: A record, double A record, or C name and everything. So you can manage. So initially, as I mentioned, that I'll create a GoDaddy, a domain on GoDaddy, deploy app on Hariko. Hariko will give me an URL. So I'll pick that URL and I'll say hello, and then I'll say the C name and I'll paste the URL over here. Save changes. Now this domain can connect to the Hariko. So in that case, I'm using the domain name service of this Freenome website. At this moment, what we wanted to do is we wanted to shift our domain management service to Route 53 because AWS has given us multiple features to management of these DNS services. So we are not using this DNS service and we are going to specify the name servers. So I'll pick this over here, pick this there. Change the name server. Now our domain is from Freenome. We have bought from Freenome, but it will not manage any kind of mapping or management of our domain name server. So all the requests coming to this domain will directly go to our AWS, will not go over there. Okay, now let's go back and there will be no difference for this. Now our mapping is done. Whatever will be available on this URL will be managed by AWS. So now we can manage our application from here. So what we can do is we'll go to create record and let's say I say test. So test.domainname.com. I'm creating a record. A record is whenever you wanted to specify IP address. So you will use a record, but the quality of because it's an AWS. So when we'll be using the CDK, I'll show you the code from the CDK. When we'll be using CDK, we can directly specify the resource and then AWS will directly map the IP address. At this moment, in our case, I'm mapping the C name, and let's say I say github.com, just to show you guys. Simple routing, time to live is the cache of your domain on your domain name servers or ISPs, so that if there is a change in your server, it will not reflect until this time it passes. So, I have created this record. Now that means it means that whenever user hit the test. It will redirect to at this moment, as I have not managed all the security level things, it will redirect me to the github.com. So that's how you manage your domain. So now, instead of, you must need to understand, assuming that this is a GoDaddy, all the DNS were being managed in the GoDaddy's DNS service. You are completely changed DNS service from GoDaddy to AWS. Now all the records, CNAME, AAA, mail exchanges, everything will be managed over here. And you can create, let's say, another record. Let me just show you. Switch to the wizard, weighted. I'll explain the weighted later, but what you can do is you can specify your services directly from here. That's the quality of AWS. So that's why you will be willing to move to the DNS service of AWS. You can specify over here. Now, we have done this. We have created our DNS service. We have used the Route 53 and created the hosted zone for this domain. And now, whenever we'll deploy our application, let's say we'll deploy our application on CloudFront, what we need to do is we need to add a URL. So what we have to do is we have to create a record, switch to a quick, select the CNAME, and then we have to specify here the CloudFront URL. Because we don't have at this moment, so we'll go to the code and I'll show you that. But what CloudFront does is, for CloudFront we also need, because it's in a HTTPS, we need a certificate as well. So for that, what we have to do is we have to use the AWS certificate management service to create a service for our domain. These are the important concepts before we go to the code. So first I'll show these things, then we'll easily understand from the code. So AWS Certificate Manager. And another important thing is AWS CloudFront won certificate inside US East 1 zone. So they have meant, I'll show you the article or a link where they mention this. I'll show you the link. So at this moment, we have this. These are my existing certificate. What we have to do is we have to request a certificate. I'll create a public certificate, request a certificate, and then I have to specify the name of a domain. So my domain is the one we have created, demo AWS TK. And next, validation through DNS. Next, don't want to add any tag. It is done. And confirm request. Now, basically, this is a time-taking process. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it done within a few minutes, or sometimes it can take hours, 2 hours, or maybe 24 hours. Once this is done, what it is trying to do is it's trying to create a certificate, and then the information of that certificate need to pass inside a route. So what I have to do is I have to copy this name And I have to create a record over here. A CNAME record. The name will be this, and the value will be this. Create a record. Until you have this record over here, this will still stay pending. So it will require this. These things need to be done manually. In this case, then once we'll go to the code, this process we will automate this process. Okay, so we have this CNAME record of our certificate. It will take some time, so we'll move over the other. Continue. And it it quite fast at this moment, so it didn't take much time, and it worked very fast. So the mapping is being done now. The certificate has been issued to our domain. Now HTTPS calls can be made to our URL. So this URL demo 1.http, and our CloudFront can be hosted behind this URL, and we can send requests to the CloudFront using this URL. This is the basic things which we need to create. So we need to create a hosted zone, and then we need to create the certificate, and then we'll deploy our application, and then we need to create a record, a CNAME record or an a record, so that whenever request comes for this demo app1, it will go to the CloudFront's URL. That's what we need to do. Now, coming to the code. In our application, we have this example. So what we need to do is we are trying to host our website or a web application to CloudFront, and then we are trying to map our service with the Route 53. So for that, as we have seen in our initial steps, how we can create a website. So we have to create S3 bucket. Forget the zone at this moment. We need to create a CloudFront distribution, and then we need to create a bucket deployment. These three points are those which we are doing for creating a web application and hosting on the CloudFront. For that, what I'll do is I have created a basic application. There is nothing, just the installation of these libraries. So to work with this, we need following libraries: AWS CloudFront, CloudFront Origin, Route 53, Route 53 Target, AWS. These libraries need to be installed. So I have already installed these, and there is nothing else inside. Okay. Now what I'll do is I'll copy this code for the bucket. So I need to CloudFront Origin S3 deployment AC. Okay, so we are creating S3 bucket, and then we are saying we need to create a distribution. So at this moment, I'll remove all things related to the domain. So this is what we have already done in the step 02 or 03, I guess. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to create a bucket. So it will create a bucket in S3. Then we are trying to create CloudFront distribution. So it works as a CDN. And then we are saying the origin of the website is this S3 bucket. and the root should be a index.html. So we should have an index.html file, and we are saying that create a bucket deployment, and where to find the code of a website in the slash frontend folder, and the destination bucket is our bucket. So that's, there is nothing related to the CloudFront at this, sorry, Route 53 anything. We're just creating a simple CloudFront distribution. Let me create a folder. It should be name frontend, or any name you wanted to, index.html. Inside that, create the basic structure of HTML, and then so we have just basic application, and we don't need anything else. We just have uh, now if I'll deploy this code, what will happen is it will deploy this application to the CloudFront and will give us a URL abcxyz.cloudfront.com. That's the basic deployment of our application, and we do not have to do anything. But what we want is, we do not want to give this abcxyz hello.cloudfront.com to our customers. What we wanted to do is, we wanted to give them a proper domain name like facebook.com or gmail.com. So again, we have to buy a domain. So let's go to this application, and actually I have multiple domains over here. So I'm not using this because we have already created certificate and all those things for this. I'll pick my sample app. I have created it previously, and there is no DNS related thing into it. I have to copy it. So we'll be using this now. Inside the code, let's see what we are trying to do with the zone. As we have created the zone here, when we created the zone, example.com, so we are creating public host zone. Now if we try to create this host zone, the problem is the creating of a zone or DNS mapping is a time taking task, and it does not work directly as it is. So if you will do this and then you try to create a certificate, it will not work, because we need to have hosted zone already available, and our domain should be already mapped with the name server of our hosted zone. Then our deployment, certificate creation, and all those things will work smoothly. Otherwise it will fail, and it will take time because it requires certificate verification. It will not work. So we'll not be able to get the result in this style. Basically what we wanted to do is, we wanted to create a zone. As I have showed here, once we create a zone, we have to pick these name servers, and then we have to pass these name server inside the DNS. These things are not being done. So if these things are not being done manually, you will not be able to do uh, the deployment, or the mapping will not done, or certificate will not generate automatically. So this first step, what you have to do is, you have to create your hosted zone manually. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go for hosted zone, and I'll create the zone, and I'll use this domain name, the simple sample app 4TK. Public hosted zone, create a zone. Now we have 4 records. Copy this record and add the inside the name servers. change the name server. Now our name server has this, for this domain name server has been switched to our AWS name server. This needs to be done manually because the mapping is required for the name server, which needs to be specified into the separate service. Okay, now let's go back to our code. And as we are using the existing host, so what we have to do is we have to use the different style of creating a zone. Const my zone equals to new route 53 dot hosted zone dot from hosted zone attributes. We have hosted zone from lookup. It requires the initial value in the stack. Hosted zone ID, it's in a, I guess in experimental stage, so it asks for the zone name as well. So hosted zone with attribute, this is working for us. This we'll say hosted zone, then we have to specify the zone name and zone ID. So what is zone name and zone ID is basically, let's go back to our, we have created this zone, uh, the sample F4. It has, this is the hosted zone ID. So we have to copy this ID, we have to pass this, and the zone name is actually, this is our domain. So let me create a variable so we can use, because we'll be using it at multiple places. Domain name. Why still error? Okay, we will not using the new keyword. We'll say route 53 dot hostname dot from attribute. Now what it will do is it will use the existing zone. So the name server mapping has already been done on this zone, and all other things will work smoothly. What we need to do then is uh, skip the certification for a while. What we have to specify, either if you don't want to use IPv6 at this moment, it's an additional, so I'm ignoring this. You need to specify domain name. So what you are trying to say is to your CloudFront that this CloudFront should be mapped to your domain name panacloud.tk. That means, as in my initial example, as I said, that when you create a domain, buy a domain on GoDaddy, and you deploy your application on Hariko, so the URL of Hariko you need to specify inside the GoDaddy, and the URL of your domain is you need to specify inside the Hariko. So what we did is we are trying to say that domain, we are specifying our URL into the Hariko. So our CloudFront is actually a deployment. So we are adding the domain name, and then we have to specify certificate as well. So what I have to do is I have to add the domain names, view array, and instead of specify the variable name, so we do not have to use. Okay. And we do not have to do anything here. Then what we have to do is we have to create route 53 a record. Now, as I mentioned, we have to specify hosting URL in the domain and the domain name into the hosting. So we have done one part. Now we have to specify the a record. A record is a DNS record basically, which is actually returns the IP address of your machine. So we are trying to create an a record. You have to specify your zone. So it's my zone. Now the other thing you need to specify is the target. So what is the target of this A record? Let me show you again that here what we did is when we try to create the this record with the C name, we specify the github.com. So if I'll go to create record and I say a record, I have to specify the IP address of a machine which where the code is deployed. But because of the AWS, what we can do is we can specify the alias of our target and AWS manage it itself. So what we have to do is route 53.record target dot from alias new target dot cloudfront target, and we'll specify our distribution. This is our distribution. Now you can understand the crossover. In the deployment, we are specifying domain. In the DNS, we are specifying the IP or the location of where the code is hosted, our application is hosted. This is what will be needs to be run, and what when it will runs, it will access the existing hosted domain. It will create the CloudFront distribution, and it will map to this particular domain sampleapp.tk. It will create the deployment with this distribution, and it will add a record. So the record will be added directly inside our domain sampleapp4.tk. At this moment, you can see only 2 record over here. And let me open the second one as well. In this case, we have added the certificate CNAME as well and the record as well. So there should be a 2 more record to run this domain smoothly, and the A record. So once you run this, it should be working. But the problem with the CloudFront is CloudFront requires a certificate. I don't know. Yes, I found. So this is one of the URL which mentions if you want to require HTTPS between viewers CloudFront, you must change the region to US East 1. So your certificate should be inside US East 1. This is the requirement, and you have to specifically specify the region for your certificate. That's why when we come over here, now we can see a certificate creation. What it does is basically it's a service, separate service, AWS certificate manager. As I showed you the direct creation, and you call the acm.dns validate certificate for this domain using this zone, and the region should be US East 1. So what it will do is it will create a certificate, then add that record inside our DNS, and the verification will be done automatically. At this moment, what we had to do previously, I created this certificate manually, and it has given me this record, and I pasted that record inside the CNAME of, so it will done automatically. This A record action will be done automatically using the code directly. So now what we have to do is we have to copy this code. My zone and domain name should be domain name, and we specify this certificate inside our distribution. Now this the process is complete. We have the bucket, it will create, we have the zone. So we are using the existing zone because this is the manual process of providing the name server inside the domain from where you have bought the domain. Certificate creation, the distribution, and you specify domain name and this certificate, the deployment, and the A records. So this is the implementation. Now the deployment takes time. It takes time. So I'll start the deployment and we'll see. So once we are done, what we do is npm run build. The deployment takes longer than normal. We have seen up till now because it creates the certificate, hosting, and everything. So that's why it takes time. CDK deploy. And one more important thing, because the validation of certificate takes time, so it creates the certificate over here. The mapping is done automatically. Now the verification, it's a behind the scene process that it takes time, so it will done immediately. Your deployment will go a bit faster. It will take time, so your deployment will stay till your certificate is being validated. I guess Varis was okay. Now what will happen is, it will let me show you the code. So first it will create the bucket. It will use this hosted domain. It will try to create the certificate, I guess. And the interesting part is, they behind the scene it creates multiple lambda functions and many other things which we do not know what is happening. So you can see the certificate creation is in process. Let me show you here. So it has not appeared yet. Now you can see pending validation. So it has created the sample app certificate, and it will add that certificate over here in the CNAME directly. So you do not have to do it manually. You can see here it's automatically added over here. Now this certificate verification process can sometimes take time. Generally it's a minute or two or a 5 minute. Sometime it can 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. If this validation takes that much of a time, your deployment of CDK will fail. So that's why generally you try to do, what you try to do is create a certificate also manually and add it to the CNAME as well. But if it will uh, sometime it works fast, like in this case. So we have the certificate, it says issued, so that means it is validated. We have this, and now in a moment we'll see another A record which will map with our CloudFront. So it's creating the distribution at this moment. This certificate mapping process is the real pain, creating a zone in the certificate issuing process, because it requires the mapping and your A record as well. The A record, sometimes it's not reflect that is quite fast. So these process are not a day-to-day basis, or you do not create zone and delete zone every other second or every other day. So these things are to be done manually. Okay, so seems like distribution. We still don't have a record, but our certificate is done. So it's creating the distribution and creating the mapping. So it's trying to write the a record inside our DNS service, which is in our case this hosted zone, and it create the mapping. So what we'll have is we'll have the CloudFront URL, as well as we will have the our normal domain. So now it's on the bucket deployment. Now you can see there is an a record name, a simple routing, and we have the CloudFront URL. So this CloudFront URL means our code, our website is deployed on this particular URL on CloudFront, and we have mapped this to our sample folder.tk. So the record has been set. Let me go to this URL. Hello world from AWS domain 1. So it's showing this on the CloudFront. Now the domain which I have used, let me go to this domain, and it's available on this domain as well. So now the whole process, when we hit this URL, it will go to the DNS root server. Then DNS root server will return the name server of a .tk, and then it will go to the AWS route 3 name servers. AWS route 3 name server will return IP of the particular machine where this our service is deployed. So in our case, it's inside the bucket. So it will AWS mapping our resources directly, and then that code will return to us in this way. A deployment is still in progress, but I was not uh, patient to test it. So the deployment will be done, and we can see the output is. So that's how you do the domain mapping with your hosting and for the route 53 mapping.
It's a very nice service.
Yeah, one thing, just have to show one thing which I initially mentioned. What you can do is, let's say I'm saying CNAME and I'll specify the URL. What I can do is I can create a routing or weighted routing. So I'm saying that 200 or 100, and I'll name it hello. It means I can create a two name record. So our application, the DNS routing, what it will do is it will wait the request coming from the client. So few requests will go to particular this domain, and few requests will go to the another domain. So I'll say hello.com, and I'll create another CNAME record which hello1.com, and it will be weighted. So the let's say 20% of request will go to the hello.com, and the 80% request will go to the hello1.com. So you have the routing policy within the AWS namespace, and you can manage this directly. That's being done. Last thing which I'll have to show is what you can do is you can check health of your domain by creating a health check. So I'll create the health check of the domain which the hosted domain we have created a moment ago. Sample F4. I'll say name new check. I want to test the endpoint using the domain name. So I'll specify the domain name here. It will go for the port 80 and the next. Do you want to create an alarm? So now if what it will happen is if there is an error or your website is down, something is wrong, what you can do is you can send the notification to a topic. Let's say what it will do is it will create a topic, and whenever there is an error, it will send the error to my email address directly. So you can create a multiple alarms by using this. You can see the new check in a moment. It will start showing like this because Once you click on it, it will show you the detail of your domain, the monitoring, the request, and the health checkers. So the IP, the call of a request. So it checks the health of your what you say application, and it keeps identifying it, and if there is an error, it will inform you. So you can manage this as well from the AWS directly. It's still unknown. It will show in a moment. I guess we are done with this. Okay, so that's it for the Route 53. There is still many things which you can do with this, and create a complete, use the complete DNS of your AWS directory.
You should have to get
Yes, sir.
started.
Sorry.
I was saying it is enough to get started.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, then yes.
Bye bye. Thank you so much, Inoma. Thank you so much. Both of you did a marvelous job. See you guys next time. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.